A decision is imminent in the case of Bruce Lehrmann versus Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson, the defamation case that has gripped Australia. I'm Claire Harvey, editorial director of The Australian and host of our daily news podcast, The Front. I'm joined by Ellie Dudley, our legal affairs correspondent. We've both been in court since November, covering this sprawling matter, which has dragged in the law, politics, sex, drugs, and a bit of rock and roll. Ellie, there's a judgment coming down on Monday. Justice Lee has actually been pretty quick for a federal court judge, hasn't he?
Yeah, definitely. Considering this case started towards the end of November, to turn around a judgment, by the middle of April is pretty good for a federal court judge. We were expecting it a couple of weeks ago, but unfortunately that was thrown out due to new evidence that came up from a former producer at Network 7, a man named Taylor Albach, who had been part of the production team at 7 Spotlight that had interviewed Bruce Lehrmann after his criminal trial was aborted. That was quite a ride, wasn't it?
It's been a bit of a culture war, really. We've seen expose the tensions between Network 10, Network 7 and plenty of other media organisations who've been expressing very strong views about this matter. Spotlight is a edgy tabloid TV current affairs program on Network 7. It is famous for going after other people's journalism, and in this matter it went after the journalism of Network 10 and of news.com.au, exploring whether the original Brittany Higgins story was justified, whether it was true, and giving Bruce Lehrmann his opportunity to have his say. The former producer of that program has alleged all sorts of strange goings on at 7, including the provision of cocaine and prostitutes, at least to himself. He has alleged that it was also provided to Bruce Lehrmann. 7 Network has denied that that was with their knowledge or approval. What do we make in the end of Taylor Albach's evidence?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because he was also claiming things like that Bruce Lehrmann had been provided confidential documents during his criminal rape trial for the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins in Parliament House. Taylor Albach was saying that Bruce provided 7 Spotlight with documents from that case, that he was provided, as a party to that case, that were confidential documents, provided them to 7 Spotlight for them to use in their broadcast. Now, Taylor Albach sat on the stand and he told the court a lot of very interesting things, and at one point Justice Michael Lee piped up and said that clearly Taylor Albach is somebody with an axe to grind, somebody who has it out for his former employer 7 and various colleagues that he worked with there. Whether or not that means that he's telling the truth or not is yet to be determined, and I think that's something that Justice Lee is going to have to address when he hands down his judgment on Monday.
That was Network 10's attempt to demonstrate that Bruce Lehrmann is not a reliable witness, that he was in contempt of court, and that he can't be believed about anything, including whether or not he raped Brittany Higgins. Yeah,
absolutely. It goes to credit, which is interesting because we know towards the end of the defamation trial last year that Justice Lee had already found some credit issues with Bruce Lehrmann and also Brittany Higgins. So whether or not this new evidence from 7 is going to be consequential is something we're going to have to learn on Monday.
And that brings us to what are we going to be watching for when this judgment is handed down on Monday. You'll be able to watch it live at theaustralian.com.au, and I'll be watching for what the judge finds about who lied. I think it's been admitted by lawyers for Brittany Higgins and lawyers for Bruce Lehrmann that each of those people have lied at various points along the way. It's whether those lies were big or little, how consequential they were, how understandable they were. What else will you be looking out for?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting how this defamation trial has just become a de facto rape trial. We've seen all of the evidence that was presented during Bruce Lehrmann's criminal trial in 2022 dragged up again, as well as additional evidence about how Network 10 handled Brittany Higgins' allegations, whether or not they treated Bruce Lehrmann reasonably in developing their project interview with Brittany Higgins. But I think that the thing that's going to keep people glued to their screen is whether or not it is found that Bruce Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins in Parliament House, of course, on the balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt, which is the civil standard of proof, not the criminal standard.
There's another question just beneath that, which is what the judge finds about whether or not they had sex. There are all sorts of possibilities about the way that encounter unfolded, from they had sex where she was not consenting, to they had sex where he believed she was consenting, to where they had sex where she was consenting, and then that they didn't have sex at all, which of course is Bruce Lehrmann's claim.
Of course.
He's gone in with this very bold claim that there was no sexual activity whatsoever, and that goes to the question of whether he's a liar.
Yeah, and if what 10 has argued at least, if Justice Lee finds that the pair did have sex, Network 10 has said that Bruce Lehrmann should only be paid really nominal damages, as much as maybe $1, because they say that he would be such an unmeritorious plaintiff at that point, somebody who had brought this huge defamation case to the federal court based on a lie, that therefore he shouldn't be awarded many damages at all, if costs.
Sue Chrysanthu, counsel for Lisa Wilkinson, advanced a really interesting argument right in her closing submissions that she suggested to the judge that it was possible that Bruce Lehrmann knew that they had had sex, believed that it was consensual sex, but then spoke to his lawyers early on in the piece, who told him, don't tell us anything, don't tell us what you've done, but just know that a very drunk person cannot consent to sex legally in this jurisdiction. And Sue Chrysanthu's hypothesis, which she very carefully put to the judge, was, maybe someone in his situation would then make the decision to just deny everything and cross his fingers that there was no DNA evidence or other kinds of corroborating evidence to back up her claim.
And if that is a gamble that Bruce Lehrmann has taken, it's a very, very risky gamble, because at that stage, he didn't know whether or not Brittany Higgins had gone to the doctor, he didn't know whether or not she had reported it to police. So for him to just say, no, we didn't have sex at all, didn't know if she had gotten a rape kit, anything like that, was a very risky gamble. Of course, we know that he completely denies that sexual intercourse ever took place at all. So that is what he stands by, and it's what he will continue to stand by, I'm sure.
And of course, one of his barristers, Steve Wybrow SC, argued to the judge that would be the gamble of his life. That would be a totally unreasonable gamble for a young man to take. That a young man presented with the notion that someone who he thought had been a consenting partner was accusing him of rape would be more likely to tell the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. So that all sort of goes to the truth defence. We know that 10 has put up a truth defence. That's its number one defence, saying, hey, Bruce, we didn't defame you because you actually did rape Brittany Higgins. But they've also put up a qualified privilege defence as well, saying that they acted reasonably in their reporting of the matter in their interview with Brittany Higgins, and it was in the public interest. How do you think that they'll go on qualified privilege?
I think 10's internal workings have been exposed as not ideal. I think it's clear that they, although they didn't identify Bruce Lehrmann by name, they absolutely did identify him. That's another critical point that the judge will have to determine. Was he clearly identified by this program? I think it's clear that he was. And then, was their journalism reasonable? Did they go to him with enough notice? Did they genuinely seek his side of the story? I think they went to him they gave him a weekend, basically, to answer these questions. He didn't respond. He says that he didn't even see their inquiries. They have questioned whether that is plausible. And then the third thing is the rigour of their journalism in probing the inconsistencies in Brittany Higgins' story, of which there were quite a lot. And maybe at the age of 23, we all would have had inconsistencies in our stories after an event like this. What do you think about how well 10 has demonstrated that it did make reasonable efforts to do the journalism properly?
It's interesting. It was interesting seeing it from Lisa Wilkinson's defence. She basically came out and said that she wasn't really a journalist, that she was just the television presenter in this matter, and she had a team of journalists and producers working behind her to interrogate these claims. Things like, the photo of the bruise that Brittany Higgins provided to the project, which was aired during the interview, which she said was caused by being pinned against a couch by Bruce Lehrmann during the alleged rape. Something that Bruce Lehrmann's lawyers pressed is that they didn't properly check the metadata to see when that image was taken. They alleged that image was completely fabricated. Whether or not the project and the Network 10 producers should have probed that image further is again something that Justice Lee will have to determine when he hands down his judgment on Monday.
He'll also have to look at whether it's plausible that 10 didn't really investigate Brittany Higgins' initial claim to them in a 5-hour pre-interview that the government might have wiped her phone, that she didn't have any photos, any WhatsApp messages, any text messages relating to the night in question, because mysterious mysteriously enough, the government for which she was still working at the time that she did the interview had remotely wiped the phone. Lisa Wilkinson was sceptical about that, wasn't she?
She was completely sceptical about that, but she, and you could see that in messages and emails that she sent amongst her producers, which were tendered to the federal court and made public online. Again, that's going to be something that Justice Lee is going to have to investigate and determine whether or not they made reasonable efforts to see whether or not Brittany Higgins was telling the truth in that instance.
Many of the messages that she had been sending around that time were subsequently retrieved from her phone by the Australian Federal Police, and much has been made of a Celebrite report which revealed huge numbers of texts, including some exchanges where she had deleted one message in an exchange with a friend or with her former boyfriend Ben Dillaway that she believed was not going to help her case. And of course, again, maybe at 23, in this very frightening situation, we all might have made poor decisions about what to delete and what to keep.
Yeah, before you hand your phone over to the police, especially knowing concerns that whether or not all of these messages are going to be made public, your life is going to be rifled through, which of course is the circumstance that a woman has to go through if she's going to report her alleged rape. Deleting those messages or not, whether that is going to be something that is used against Network 10 in these instances, again, we'll find out on Monday.
Okay, so let's go through the potential findings on Monday. Number one, the judge finds she was raped. On the balance of probabilities, it did happen. Who wins in that case?
10 wins. I think at that stage, Justice Lee would find that Bruce Lehrmann is a liar, and whether or not qualified privilege stands up or not is just a kind of a moot point at that stage. Whether or not the rape occurred seems to be the bigger point here.
Okay, next option is that the judge finds that she was not raped, that Bruce Lehrmann is telling the truth when he says they didn't have sex at all.
It'll be interesting to see how qualified privilege plays in at that point, because at that stage you would safely say that Bruce has won, but whether or not 10 acted reasonably could reduce the amount of damages that he would receive in that instance.
The judge could find that they had sex, but that it was either consensual or that Bruce Lehrmann believed that it was consensual, i.e. that Brittany Higgins was not drunk enough to make it automatically non-consensual sex. What will be critical in that decision is the video of her walking into Parliament. She had not seen that vision before Channel 7's Spotlight report aired, and that was one of the big gets that they had. She walks through the checkpoint. She takes off her shoes. She walks through again. She attempts to put her shoes on, and then she kind of skips down the corridor following Lehrmann and a security guard. Much has been made of how drunk she was in that video, how drunk she appears, and that's going to be really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then what we saw in that CCTV footage during the trial was her knocking back drinks at the Dock Hotel with her colleagues. We also heard from a toxicology expert saying that she would have been incredibly drunk had she drunk according to the CCTV footage that saw her drink 10 or 11 drinks that night. So yes, that's of course going to be important. Whether or not Justice Lee finds that they had consensual sex, or they had sex at all, consensual or otherwise, again, I think that is a huge mark on Lehrmann's credit. If the judge finds that they had sex, then he's brought these proceedings based on a lie, that lie being that they never had sex at all. And again, I could see Justice Lee really ripping into Lehrmann at that point for being a liar.
There is a possibility that the judge finds that whatever happened with the sexual encounter or otherwise, that 10 was not reasonable in publishing this story. That really brings Me Too reporting to a screaming halt, doesn't it? It
does. And it would be an incredible challenge for 10. This was sort of the shining glory of the project a few years ago before it sort of got dragged through a criminal trial and through Bruce Lehrmann's allegations and sort of subsequent interviews that have come out of it. But yeah, it really damages the ability for the media to do Me Too reporting without being incredibly careful about the sort of stories that they report and the allegations that they're reporting on.
This was Me Too on steroids too, because 10's claim in the very first words of the broadcast were that this was a story about a young woman silenced, forced to choose her career over the pursuit of justice, silenced by politics. 10 has claimed in all its submissions and its arguments that it did not claim that there was a political conspiracy. I mean, clearly the judge is going to have a problem believing that.
I would say so. In this interview, we know that Brittany Higgins gave evidence about her former boss, Fiona Brown, who was the chief of staff to Linda Reynolds, and how she was completely unsupportive when Brittany Higgins first reported the alleged rape to her. We heard Lisa Wilkinson say things like Parliament House is the easiest place in the country for a rape to occur. For them to say that no, they didn't report on any political conspiracy seems pretty unbelievable from where I'm standing. But again, it's up to Justice Lee to decide.
Fiona Brown and her then boss, Linda Reynolds, the former minister in the coalition government, have of course said that their lives have been ruined by the allegation that they participated in a political conspiracy. And we had some amazing evidence from Fiona Brown about what she said actually happened behind the scenes, which is that Minister Reynolds and another senior minister, Alex Hawke, were pressuring Fiona Brown to go to the police, saying, regardless of whether this young woman wants to go to the police or not, you need to drive yourself to a police station right now and report this anyway. She refused because she said, I can't do that without the victim's consent. So, I mean, it's diabolical, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, there was one person that we didn't hear from throughout this trial who Justice Lee, I think, referred to as the prophet Elijah, and that's David Shiraz. Do you think that he's going to come up at all on Monday?
I think the judge will absolutely have to make reference to him. It's very clear the judge signalled numerous times to both sides that he wanted to hear what they thought about David Shiraz's contribution. Of course, David Shiraz is the boyfriend who came along a long time after this alleged rape, who then was the first person to contact both Lisa Wilkinson and Samantha Maiden, the court has heard, with a story about a political conspiracy. David Shiraz is a former television producer who is linked to the Labor Party. His first marriage involved, had a Labor Party theme.
Yeah, a Labor-themed wedding.
I suppose you didn't have a Labor-themed wedding.
I know, maybe the next one.
You know, the tables were named after former Prime Ministers. There was the Whitlam table and the Gillard table and 2 Rudd tables, which I thought was kind of funny. But, you know, there is no doubt that David Shiraz sold this story as the coalition's cover-up of a young woman's rape. In messages from David Shiraz to Brittany Higgins, which have been disclosed in these proceedings, we've seen him referring to then Prime Minister Scott Morrison with the C word. She has said in those messages, Brittany Higgins has said that the Prime Minister was going to get effed over. You know, David Shiraz's contribution, I think, must be something that the judge looks at. I just don't know which way it's going to fall.
Yeah, and because he was the first one to reach out to Lisa Wilkinson. He worked with Lisa way back when, and so sent her an email that I think he signed off with love or something like that. And it was something that Justice Lee asked a question about was, you know, is that normal? Was he an acquaintance or was he a friend? And Lisa Wilkinson made it very clear that David Shiraz was just an acquaintance, somebody who she had, you know, run into the halls of a television studio years earlier. So whether or not Justice Lee does make any comments about David Shiraz is yet to be seen.
Ellie, we'll get out the popcorn and be ready for the judgment on Monday.
Wonderful.